presentation with Bill Wong. Bill Wong is an AI and data analytics practice leader at Dell Technologies in Canada. He has 20 plus years of experience in AI and analytics, working with only some companies like IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, and Dell Technologies. In other words, he's in the vortex and the way all this stuff is moving around. He's published numerous books, which is fantastic to anybody who knows how hard it is to get a book out the door, and white papers, which are even more useful and shorter and easier to read, and one scientific paper on a fascinating subject of how do you use drug discovery, how to use AI and machine learning to do drug discovery, which you may know is an incredibly complex and time-consuming task, and how can that be done better with machine learning? And a quarterly AI newsletter distributed worldwide. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Bill, who tells me this presentation contains a lot of brand new material and ideas, and we all get to be the first audience to hear it. Thank you very much for joining us, Bill. I'm going to disappear into the background, but I will be here throughout the session, and I'll be looking for the questions that come in for the Q&A at the end of the session. See you soon.
Thanks very much, Chris. Hi, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And yes, welcome to this session. I'm going to talk about AI and financial services. And you get bonus marks if you can recognize the icon on the bottom right-hand corner. It's the city I'm presenting out of, and that's Toronto. And I was with the GM of one of the NVIDIA divisions looking after financial services. And he said to me yesterday, he said, well, Canada, it's great to talk to you. You guys certainly hit above your weight. And that's how Canada is kind of perceived in AI. You've been here before, you'll know, and NVIDIA and other companies refer to as Toronto as kind of the birthplace or the big bang of the latest generation of AI. The new AI here. It was the first time, and there was a contest called ImageNet where we used GPUs, deep learning algorithms. We had lots of data, and that spawned papers. It spawned the Turing Awards awarded to a number of the researchers who were involved there. And since then, and that was back in 2011, AI has been continuing to grow like gangbusters, and probably no other industry. Financial services, it leads in the adoption of AI, and we'll take a look at some of the reasons why there. So let's go. So talk high level about the environment that we're all working in. I'm going to focus on AI and automation tools, and finally I'll talk about the challenges and end on a positive note that yes, there are lots of things that we're doing to try to address these challenges in deploying AI. So the environment that we're in. I have the opportunity as the practice leader for AI to deal with a lot of different organizations in financial services. And especially the banks are quite concerned about competition. The emergence of the fintechs, we'll talk about them, but not just the fintechs. You have digital commerce giants like eBay, Amazon, and their own payment schemes. If you do eBay, you know that you're using PayPal. And a lot of them talk about what happens or what would happen if somebody like Google entered financial services. I know a bunch of insurance companies, they ask themselves that, but from my perspective, I don't think that'll happen. Again, that's my opinion. Certainly, they're going to push the envelope and try to get what business they can get, like payments, for instance, on credit cards. But once you join, into the fray of financial services, what happens is on the right, a massive amount of regulation is required, and that doesn't really jive well with any of the hyperscalers. They probably have been, I guess, under the radar when it comes to regulation with all governments around the world. And that's not going to change just because they enter financial services. So, but I do think it's useful to use them as a benchmark. And why is it useful to use as a benchmark is the bottom left-hand corner, this changing market. everybody wants a piece of the next generation coming up, be it Gen Z, the Millennials, whatever you call them. These are digital savvy people, and the interfaces they like, they gravitate to the digital commerce giants and the hyperscalers, not traditional financial services companies. On the far right, lots of huge macroeconomic trends that are occurring. But of all these things that are placed here, probably the only thing that you have some level of control is what technologies you can pick to thrive in this environment. And so I'll talk about AI, automation, and cloud briefly, but hopefully give you a good overview of these technologies and what you can do. Now, the millennials, very attractive market. My favorite kind of observation about them is this last one here, that 71% of millennials would rather go to the dentist than to listen to what banks are saying. So don't take it as a slight. Millennials don't like to listen to anybody, but especially kind of your father's or your mother's financial institutions. They want something that is at the palm of their hand. And what's coming up, I don't know if it's used a lot, but people are starting to talk about the Gen C. Some people have called this the connected consumer. Some people are calling it, kind of the COVID generation. That will have a mark on these people, but that's kind of the next generation that's coming. But again, the ones that they're gravitating toward are Google and Amazon. And in the midst of this, as we try to select technologies that will give us a competitive advantage in the marketplace, this metric here that there's a huge shortage of IT skills. That's nothing new. And I submit that it'll always be like that until perhaps maybe you use AI that you won't need any developers, but we're far away from that right now. And in some surveys, some HR professionals are saying that up to 70% of the developer community is either open or actively looking for a change. And the reason for that, I don't know if you know any developers, but I've worked with developers my whole career. And I find that, developers don't stay developers. You don't see too many people who are like 20 years developing. It's an industry, it's an area of technology that, they're not waiting for the next programming language to learn. It's different there. So typically developers, what I've seen is they may start their own firm, they might do consulting, they'll become solution architects, but it's rare that they say, hey, after 10 years, I still like to code. So they change, and I think we'll always be challenged. So what do we do in this environment? We need these folks to really adopt these new technologies going forward. So enter the business technologist. A number of companies, including Gartner, have talked about this group. And I'll bet you people who are watching this right now, some of you are what we would consider a business technologist. Now, this isn't a title. It's people who are not reporting to the IT department, but are technology savvy. In this chart here, you'll see that only 10% are really officially IT type staff, with only 4% officially in IT departments. 6%, even more. We've seen a lot of business units hire their own IT staff because they can't really depend on central IT to get what they really want. And then the rest, 49%, they're happy just to receive what the IT department sends them. Now, this 41%, I should just mention, this is kind of an average. In some industries, such as government, this will be a lower number, about maybe 25%. In my industry, in technology, that's probably around 50%. And I would submit that in financial services as well, it's higher than 41%. So these business technologists, types of business technologists that we're seeing emerge are what we call citizen developers, citizen data scientists, or citizen integrators. Again, these are folks who report to the line of business, and they're not officially IT, but they know how to use the tools. If you take a look at the bottom part of the graphic here, they routinely use automation, integration, application development, and data science tools without the aid of IT, except for perhaps maybe to install it. Now, the reason why they're using these tools typically is to find insights. Customer insights, could be product insights, but they want to better understand how something's working, or why it's deviating. Or another popular area is they want to optimize the business process, or process if you're south of the border, automate tasks, or to integrate the customer experience, the customer journey, so it looks like you have a 360 view of the customer and that the customers are dealing just with one firm. These are the most popular types of projects, and those projects drive these kind of tools. Now, the tools that I've listed, there was a recent survey. I've actually listed the tools in kind of the order of its popularity. So in data science, the AI tools, the most popular tools that people are using are data management, or database tools, things like SQL Server, for instance, BI tools like Power BI or Tableau. And as you get down to the lower level tools, they become a little more sophisticated, a little more complex, although there are tools there that I believe some end users, business people could use. It's still kind of early there. In business process automation, lots of tools out there where you don't need to be a developer. No code required there. Same with the automation tools. These are really more and more, they're really geared toward a business professional who understands how the business functions rather than IT people. And this slide here, what it's trying to convey is these skill sets of the relative strengths or weaknesses of each of these skills that are listed on the far left. The knowledge of the data, the ability to manage data, business acumen, coding skills, etc. Now, what I put in the red boxes are the citizen integrators, the citizen data scientists, and the citizen developer. So I've been called a citizen data scientist because I tell people quite openly, I hate to code. I mean, there are some times, I might do it just for fun, but I don't like classical coding. But will I take data, put it into some kind of program, do some analysis and analytics? I'm all in there. And I would say that this probably is somewhat accurate. I would say my data skills are more like a data engineer, so probably higher than the average citizen data scientist. But if you look at the column a couple over, the data scientists, you'll see for coding skills, deep into Python, deep into the machine learning frameworks there. And that's something that's interesting, but I don't feel, let's say, that's the funnest part of being in this data science role. So I'm happy to give that to the data scientists. The forecast is that, by 2023, we're going to have 4 times as many of these folks than your classical developers here. So let's talk a little about the tools here. So when it comes to AI automation tools, the popular categories that we have, and I've been evolving this chart through the last couple of years. Business process modeling, well understood technologies, been there for a number of years, focusing on the business process and modeling that. RPA, robotic process automation, very good in terms of getting an ROI. It's a low-hanging fruit, and we'll talk about how that's evolving. Process mining is relatively new. It's exciting new technology, and what this does is it compares your existing workflows process to the optimal. and then identifies, shows you deviations of where you can improve. And then finally AI, which I'll spend time on the challenges. And what it's trying to do here is really simulate human decision making. And that can be a challenge in some use cases. So regarding AI and automation tools adoption, the first one, a big kind of vote for process mining, that's an up and coming technology. But the other two kind of forecasts that I'm seeing as well is that AI, whether you're going to know it or not, is going to be integrated in all the tools you use. Like, for instance, HR. HR people are asking questions like, who's likely to leave within the next 12 months, and if that person has a title of developer, that's probably one of those job types. But outside of job titles, there are certain activities, engagements, tells, things that employees communicate that programs out there are monitoring. That gives HR people a better idea that, hey, perhaps there's something we could do here. Let's talk to the person, maybe enrich the job, or maybe compensation isn't what it should be. So whether you know it or not, or you code it, AI is going to be embedded in a lot of the future tools. Now we get to financial services, and the folks I talk to, I haven't really found too many areas of financial services that AI cannot impact, whether you're in the front office, the back office, the middle office. There are opportunities there. Now, where I see the large focus on, one of the banks, I would say 3/4 of their AI projects really are on the far left here, is they want to tailor that customer experience, make their products easier to understand. Of course, they still want to be leaner. The cost is always a great way to cost justify, but that's not the biggest driver that I'm seeing right there. And when you talk to fintechs, they're an innovative group, and they're looking for new types of products that are enabled with AI. So a couple examples here, what AI enables you to do. Personalization, but really, the holy grail is to have so great personalization. It's hyper personalization. Now, I don't think a lot of folks are there yet. They're quite happy just to have a chatbot that is friendly. One instance, Capital One is cited as one of the first banks in the US to come out with their own kind of tailored chatbot. And what they decided to do is kind of interesting. They have a personality that they call, I forget the name, I think it's Eno, and it's and backwards it spells one. I don't know if that means anything, but it's gender neutral, and you can tell it to automate your payments, get alerts for possible fraud activities, but you could also ask it questions like, what is the meaning of life? So they're trying to make this a compelling user experience, that it's more than just automated bot to do financial transactions. So it's interesting strategy there. What we're seeing with automation is augmenting traditional automation like RPA. So JP Morgan has an application called COIN. COIN stands for Collective Contract Intelligence, CO, Contract Intelligence. And they have activities every year to make sure that they comply well. And they have a task that they've measured that takes 360,000 hours, involves lots of professionals, lawyers, etc. And they claim with AI, using RPA, and then with natural language processing and image processing to read the contracts, they reduced that time to seconds. So you can read about that. I'll have a a comment on that or a description of that in the appendix on that. And then finally, risk compliance, especially for things like fraud detection, very popular with a lot of financial services. Comes to mind, MasterCard. So a couple of years ago, I was speaking in this city, Ottawa, the capital of Canada, and a person came up to me and said that he drove in from Montreal, and he used his credit card just before leaving, and then he stopped for gas, and then the credit card was denied. And he called the credit card company and said, "Hey, you've got this false positive. Like, well, why did you do that? Like, couldn't you tell? Like, I just used it." And the person on the phone said, "Well, you did use that. Yeah, well, we see that transaction, but where you are right now, there's no way you should really be at that place in this given time." And he just laughed. And if you've ever been to Montreal, you know these folks drive like there's no tomorrow. They're speeding down the highway. So he was there at a time that he really shouldn't have been. So he laughed that off and said, "Okay, that's a great algorithm. I'm okay with that false positive." So let's go. Now enter the fintechs. All the traditional banks I talk to, are concerned about this group because they don't have the legacy of it. They're the recent grads, all the latest ideas. Outside of that, if you take a look at what they're developing on this left hand of this graphic here for the larger fintechs, they use AI to develop new products and services, as opposed to the incumbent, the traditional type of banks. Only 15% of their deliverables are considered like AI type enhanced products. So one example is that a lot of these companies will sell their algorithms to do loan processing, so that based on what they have the latest, greatest state of the art, leverage new types of data, avoiding biases and these kind of things, and so successful, I guess, that they're willing to sell that. Now, most traditional banks that I know would not do that. Their intelligence they built up, they want to keep that. So it's an interesting way of how these companies look at the marketplace. Now, I'm just going to say there are lots of challenges, even though AI has the possibility of transforming, really changing the way you do business. It is fraught with lots of challenges, and Gartner's, their estimate, 85% of those projects will fail. So why is that? Well, probably from a technology perspective, the number one reason has to do with the data. A lot of times, never mind the data quality, a lot of folks can't get at that kind of customer data that they need. But even if they can get some approximation of data, trying to make it clean, usable, audit, etc., near real time, these are challenges when you build AI applications. And the best practice with any kind of AI endeavor is first to start off big picture, have a strategy in place, know why you're in this game, understand why you want to use AI in this area. What is kind of the end goal here? And that allows you to pick the right use cases support, to pick your technology roadmap of what tools you're going to use or not. And then we build in governance. One of the first things that I usually recommend when building a strategy with the customers I support is a data platform. Because we're doing type of analytics, these aren't your silo-based applications like ERP and HR, etc. You want a central resource that is specially built and tuned to receive data, to process it, and then to deliver it to these users on the far right. And most large organizations have this in some shape or fashion, but a lot of them now are kind of being challenge with these new data types and trying to do this for new real-time decision making. Most of them kind of are not capable of doing that, and they need re-engineering. Now, the financial services industry is probably the industry that buys the most what we call alternative data. And it's a term that is used for data that's not in-house, it's external, but also kind of unconventional. It doesn't necessarily have to be normal financial data. So if you take a look at that graphic there, some of the data like satellite imagery, why would a bank or a hedge fund want to buy satellite images? And what some are doing, some hedge funds are doing, is that they're buying it, so they look at companies and they track on activity, and they can tell activity by thermal readings, by number of cars in the parking lots, and they use that as input for stock evaluations. So those are things that you could say, how much weight does that have? But they would argue that it's enough that they want to pay for it and use it as an input for evaluation. I just want to spend a little bit on the collective intelligence investing is an emerging area. So if you're a Star Trek fan like me, the concept behind this is the collective knows better than the individual. So rather than you picking your stocks or you going to a fund that's managed by one or two people, these funds are managed by 1,000 people, and they all kind of share and collaborate what they think about certain stocks, certain funds, and then they break out recommendations into multiple risk classes, and depending which class you fall in, that's the one they recommend to you. And they claim that they beat the market and any of the traditional funds that are managed by just one or two people. So a lot of interesting things here. The data that's being looked at, examined, and mined the most is social media. And not far behind it is data from payments providers, a little more traditional there. And investment management is the biggest group of financial services that are paying for these alternative data. On the right there that you see is that this market is expected to grow at a 40% compound growth rate. So lots of focus here, a lot of it driven by the financial services market. Now, whether it's alternative data or internal data, things and regarding the data, best practices, you're gonna have to treat them the same. You wanna make sure you get quality data. You wanna try to eliminate silos, be open, have a platform to new sources of data, drive toward near real time. That's a hard one, not easy. And build into it privacy, security, and ethics. Don't do this as an afterthought, because there's lots of regulations, some today, some new ones coming, that will ask you, are you using this in an ethical fashion? Are you respecting citizens' privacy? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've got lots of tools to accelerate. If you have questions on this, feel free to ask me, but I just want to focus on this one tool, Data Robot. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to use this tool. This will actually say, what algorithm do you want to use? Do you want to use deep learning? Do you want to use simple regression analysis? And you just pick the data science algorithm, feed it the data, and it will tell you that, say, hey, based on what you asked me, here's my prediction for this. It's so simple to use, it's not funny. So again, for those citizen data scientists, if you aspire to do things like that, there are tools out there. And again, as you get more into the data, lots of tools out there to help accelerate. And if you have questions, I can answer them later, but don't want to spend too much time. But these are the popular use cases when you want to build that data platform. Doing analytics, supporting analytics on the edge from edge devices, like a Fitbit device to do analytics right there. And if you need more processing power, we do what's called streaming data. You can store it in either data warehouses or data lakes for unstructured data. And then again, machine learning or deep learning, this is how you produce AI algorithms. All of these need a good data platform at the back end. And I get in a lot of conversations about where to place this. And a lot of companies, a lot of banks, some banks are saying, hey, we're doing cloud first. And I tell them, okay, great, hats off to you. And a lot of that is driven by time to market. And I believe to compete more effectively with the fintechs. However, I've seen a lot of folks stumble, get challenged here because one bank just put 4 to 5 petabytes of data up there in the cloud. And there is no cloud technologies really to churn, to work on that data in a timely fashion. And then add the latency of it and trying to move toward real time. It cannot be done with the current physical world tools that we have today. So I believe what they're going to do at some point is reevaluate and go, take a business approach first. Let's look at the characteristics of the data. Does this make sense? What are the costs long term? Yeah, it's up there and fast, but we're gonna literally break the bank if we keep it up there. Okay, last slide. Well, actually, no, I do have a couple more slides after this. This is the last kind of presentation slide. The best practices here. Regardless of what division you're in, it's useful to have a very data-driven culture. It's almost kind of a prereq if you're going to go, especially into AI, but any kind of analytics here. And have a strategy, define the architecture first before you dive in, no matter how compelling use cases. You can buy lots of applications out there off the shelf, but before you do that, work with the IT folks, try to define this architecture going forward, why we want AI here. And for each firm out there, this AI journey is unique. Now, my last chart, in the appendix, I'll talk about, I mentioned these references. They'll be there. There's some partner tools that you can look at there. But here's my last slide. And so, is it a bull or bear market? As data scientists, you get a lot of data. It's tough to avoid bias. What does this tell you? How would you interpret this data? And if you're trying to create something. Anyway, so with that, Chris, I think I'll end my presentation for now, and we can open it up for Q&A.
It's an amoeba. It's not a bull or a bear. It's an amoeba. No, that's not what you asked. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm kidding. I love the morphing of that. Okay. So Bill, I'm totally passionate and interested in your subject. I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable, so therefore I can be, the token question answer. And I've got a couple of questions that people have sent to me, but I want to think in terms first of, I think it was Clayton Christensen who wrote the book, The Innovator's Dilemma. I think it was Christensen who wrote that. And the big takeaway that I remember from Clayton Christensen was these existing companies, whatever they're doing, right, whatever they're making or doing, are always under the threat of creative destruction. That somebody comes along with an innovation and they just don't have, think of Kodak and film. There's 1,000 examples, right? They don't make the leap to the new thing for a variety of different reasons. And you hear people like my son, who's in his 20s and he's in consulting, talk about, all the banks are just going to be put to shame. They're going to be wiped out by all these fintech companies. And you spoke to that. So if you're in a traditional financial services business, and that can be anyone, that could be insurance, it could be asset management, it could be investment banking, what would you what would you like them to think about so that they can not be destroyed by the innovator's dilemma? What can they do?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and not easy to answer. You know, what the innovator's dilemma also points out, a lot of times the biggest kind of challenge, threat, is really themselves, the organizational structure. They can't have this new thing that they're developing really wipe out, 80% of their organization, which is really depends on it. So how do you have this, and some companies have had this, manage this dichotomy? And there are books just written on just the management of these two teams and how you can introduce this over time, even though, this one is kind of your big breadbasket that you need to depend on. And everybody, all your staff is really comped on that. And there are some best practices there. There are some best practices is, one, try not to demonize that group that is pulling in 80-90% of why you're there in the first place. Recognize, though, that business is changing. And how some companies do it is the organizational challenge is so difficult, too difficult, they have to partner. A lot of the traditional banks are partnering with fintechs to address certain markets because they find it's just too hard. Perhaps they lack the political will to really kind of detonate their existing org structure to make this work. But you really have to do drastic things here. And so if you're not going to partner, if you're going to do it individually, you really have to kind of, and there are kind of best practices of how you introduce this new technology, and then at what time do you introduce kind of more traditional measurements like the other lines of businesses have today. So some are doing that now, but yeah, that is a big challenge.
I think that's a great answer. I think about Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs when he wrote that kind of a rushed biography on Steve Jobs because Steve Jobs realized he was dying. And in Isaacson's book, he talks about the way Steve Jobs talked about the Apple II and when the Mac was being made. And he really treated the Apple II people like garbage. He called them the past and the legacy, and there are a bunch of, and Wozniak, Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, is saying, Steve, these people are paying the bills. They're the only reason you have money to develop a Mac. You can't be an asshole. And that's exactly what he said, so I'm quoting him. And of course, Steve was famous for, capturing the big A word. And so I think it just seems like that's a lesson we want to avoid.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It is so challenging. And on a micro level, when I talk about this on a personal level, and I think sometimes it's easier to either understand something at the micro level or at the totally gigantic macro level in order to get to the real challenge, which is in the middle. And on the micro level, the leader walks into the room and says to 6 people, we want the 6 of you to design a new process and use new technology that only needs 3 of you. And see how that goes. See how successful that project is. I have this slide I use where the 2 guys are in a firing squad with their hands behind there, and they're both looking at each other going, is it going to be you? Is it going to be me? And I think that's a version of the same thing, right? But if you walk into the room and you say to the 6 people, we have really work for 9 people. And the only way you guys we're going to be able to do this is you're going to have to figure out how to do this 6-person thing with 3 so we can put the other 3 on the other part, right? Because there's no other way to solve this. So come up with a solution and we'll figure out which 3 of you are going to kind of keep doing what you've been doing because you like it and you're good at it. And which of the 3 of you are going to go off and do this. Now, I've never seen a team given that challenge that doesn't get all excited, right? Because it's a hope and it's a future. So again, that's the micro level, that's the 6-person challenge, but we're talking about going to Credit Suisse or Citibank or Wells Fargo or Fidelity, right? And saying, if you're not careful, you're going to have your lunch handed to you. You know,
Yeah.
that's a fascinating subject. You brought something else I wanted to ask you about in this presentation. And that, this is a political hot topic, but it shouldn't be. And it's the question of bias, because I spent years in financial services, and credit risk managers are by definition looking for bias, right? They're looking for people who won't pay their bills. They don't want to lend money to people who won't pay their bills, right? But they do it in a different, the way they go about doing that is they look at trends, and well, the last time we lent X amount of money to this kind of company, they didn't pay it back, so we're not lending any money to those people anymore. And so how do you, I mean, a good credit, if the organization is racist or something, that's a whole other story. But that's really what risk people are all about, is trying to figure out how not to do stupid deals. And they're looking for in the bias, but sometimes they get it wrong. How do you think AI can help get it right and not have biases that are not warranted or justified?
So one of the good things about AI, although it's a challenge, is it can consume and process lots of data. And unfortunately, humans, a lot of people like to make decisions easy. And if you take a look at banks, credit companies, when they do loans, and they take a look at people's scores, there are companies right now that will categorize by race, their credit scores or their credit worthiness, right? And they even split up Caucasians to Hispanics, African Americans, Asians, and that is data that's produced today.
Well, aside from that sounding horrible, is there any basis in that? I mean, that's a terrible thing to do if you're just doing it by race, but
Well,
are white guys like me likely to flake out on our credit card loans? Is that what you're telling me?
some would argue that, let's say, within a few percentage, that on average, it can actually categorize your success rate. That it's actually within reason of doing that.
Tricky.
And just to clarify, the highest rating were Asians actually with the credit scores. But what AI can do for you is, let's get at what we would call real contributors, like let's say years of work, years of education, number of defaults. This is data that you can take them all and explain it to somebody, regulators, and say, these are the reasons why we selected this person. These are the reasons why not. And that's where I think AI can help. And that's where I think the model should go. And I'm hoping the fintechs, they get that and they build models more like that. It's the lazy people who kind of go, hey, we have this data. We all have data on their personal backgrounds and stuff. We can create this. And you can Google that right now. I guarantee you can find data that's categorized by race on creditworthiness.
I wonder if going forward, so let's say in 1950, the racial disparity in the way people paid their bills back was whatever. You made some chart, right? Well, guess what? The education levels, the work experience, all this stuff is getting better for everybody. So, if you have a backward-looking credit score that may have been, closer and closer to a time when groups of people didn't have opportunities, well, maybe they need to start to do predictive of, yeah, but those people are changing. They're better at whatever they're doing. So let's start thinking about what kind of credit risk they're going to be in today as opposed to 10 years ago. And so anyway, AI is fascinating that you can at least get these indicators and then try to make decisions, with what to do with them. So I have one other question for you. Well, I just realized we're out of time. Okay, I can't ask you another question. That was, well, I got to tell you, that was fantastic. I'm going to go back and watch this in detail and make myself notes, which I don't have anything to write on right now. I'll make myself notes on your previous presentation. I'll speak on behalf of anybody who watches this now and who watches this in the future. If you don't appreciate how clear and how useful your presentation was, you should, because it was a great presentation.
Thanks for.
I really enjoyed it, Bill. I don't know if it was just you and me. Well, I'd say, why didn't you bring coffee? But if it was just you and me, I would say it was a great presentation. Thank you very much. So
Great.
I think we're going to wrap it up for day 2. Bill, you can check out if you want, and I'll do a little bit of a wrap for tomorrow. So anybody who's here toward the end of this, I hope you didn't just check off and run off to lunch right now. We'll talk a little bit about what's going to happen tomorrow. We'll do a little warm up for what that session is going to be. These are 3 very interesting days. So we're going to start off today with an executive from Danske Bank, and I'll tell you later why that's a warm spot in my heart. I lived in Denmark for about 4 years before I moved back to the States. Scaled agile with global teams and virtual working. Fantastic ideas about what's going to be going on and what's happening right now with virtual work and doing development. How to develop a cost optimization ecosystem with TransUnion. So another incredibly important point with cost driving so many things. Next generation digital financial services from William Genovese from Huawei. And then we'll wrap the day with Oscar Stark, who I recently listened to give a great presentation, making rain the digital transformation journey of an African-born and bred multinational insurer. So if nothing else, these 3 days are a potpourri of interesting topics that will help you in your journey in the Amazon, your journey up to Mount Everest, or your journey through the Gobi Desert, or the metaphor in your head, business transformation in your real life and real world. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Chris Hodges. I'll be the chair tomorrow as well. I look forward to seeing your questions. I can't see all your faces, but seeing your questions tomorrow and engaging with these interesting topics that we have coming up for tomorrow. Thank you. Take care. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.